This is another series of examples of ornamental turning patterns I've done on my metal lathe that I've adapted for that purpose. Once again, this is on a piece of cheap 2-inch poplar dowel from the hardware store. In this case, this is a relatively simple pattern that can be manipulated to produce some quite attractive results. I saw this demonstrated initially by Rich Colvin on the MDF Rose Engine site, and I wasn't sure how this one had worked out, but this will end up being a Basketweave type pattern. I initially designed it for a 3-inch workpiece, but I've applied it to this 2-inch workpiece because computers will believe anything you tell them. I'm going to speed this up since this does a number of passes for each zigzag. The basic pattern is a zigzag. This is called a triangle pattern in COrnlathe, as I recall. The bit I'm using is a 60-degree V-bit, and it's being used obviously in a collet of my 800-watt spindle. So you saw the pattern shift over just a little bit along one of the zigs. And that will continue. Rich Colvin had demonstrated how you had to shift over by certain numbers of degrees and rotations. And in COrnlathe, it's a lot easier to work these things out. So I just played with it for about 20 minutes. Once I saw how it was done, then it was fairly easy to work this one out. This cutting action is sped up 8 times. This arrangement is called a drill frame, as opposed to horizontal or universal cutting frames, and that refers to how the cutter is mounted to produce the pattern. So this is simply like a drill. The speed I'm using is 4,000 RPM in my 800-watt spindle. So here's the basic pattern of a basket weave. And shortly this will shift over to start the next part of it. I got a little bit of a scratch there because my V-bit tip was a bit too close to the work. So instead of lifting up enough to clear the wood, it scratched it a little bit there. Poplar doesn't hold a pattern particularly well, so I wouldn't try to make a very fine pattern with this. That's better done with more expensive hardwoods. The fuzzies you see here do brush off quite easily with a stiff plastic brush. Sometimes I resort to a bit of steel wool or very light sanding so as not to lose the sharpness of the pattern. So this is the final pass. It gives 3 bricks going in each direction. The speed will slow down to what it was actually cutting at here shortly. I turn my workpieces or get them lined up on my wood lathe in a ordinary scroll chuck, and you can just see the jaws protruding there. This particular chuck has a 1" by 8 thread per inch thread in it, so I turn down a bolt and I hold that in the 3-jaw chuck of my metal lathe. It's a convenient way of not having to mount and unmount the work. It stays concentric. So that's about enough of that pattern to show you. So that's a basket weave. So on to the next one. This one starts out with the same zigzag pattern. Ordinarily you try to get it balanced so that each of the little block of 3 bricks looks square instead of being squashed like this one. But as I said, I think I originally made this for a 3-inch piece, not a 2-inch piece. But it's quite easy to delete one of the repeats in the planning area of COrnlathe. Since you don't want to just see ordinary zigzags, I've speeded up again 8 times. Once I understood the initial basket weave pattern, then this one was quite easy to come up with. Time to time I brush it off to see how much work I'm going to have with fuzzies. So this one, the little brick goes the other way compared to the one that was already done. So I think of this as a brick pattern, something you commonly see in brick buildings in different places of the world, particularly England, where the bricklayer got creative. And once again, I started a little bit too close to the work, so the tip of my V-bit scratched the wood a bit just there. For this example, I'm controlling my lathe with Mach 3. Almost any Gcode center can be used. It's just a question of convenience. And Billum's Gcode is designed for a XZC lathe, C being the rotary axis, and most Gcode centers are geared for X, Z, and A. But it's very easy to go into a simple text edit program, open up the Gcode and do a search and replace C for A, and then save it as that, since it's just a simple text file, and then run it. So this pattern is over, and as you see, it looks like a zigzag of bricks. So on to the third example. This starts once again like the other two with the zigzag. I had dialed back the x-axis so it wouldn't be quite so deep, but I overdid it, so it wasn't touching the wood very well here at the beginning. And later on I dial it in. It's quite easy to overcome an open loop stepper motor that's controlling this thing. I just give it a couple of clicks and that can change the depth of cut quite easily without hurting anything. Doesn't hurt the motor, doesn't hurt the cutter, unless you overdo it, of course. So this one starts out similar to the other two. As I said with the last pattern, designing this one was quite easy after I understood the initial brickwork pattern. Now this one goes a lot further over, unlike the other two. So it leaves a lot bigger rectangle there, so you'll see what that turns into here shortly. I pan back a little bit just so you can see the setup there. Now it goes to the last cut, and that reveals what the pattern will be, which is a diamond-like pattern. So there's some more examples of what you can do with a relatively simple metal lathe conversion with the right software provided by Mr. Bill Looms. That works on both Windows and Macs. You just have to download the right version from GitHub. I hope you enjoyed the examples.